Catherine King is the Australian Labor Party member for the seat of Ballarat in the Federal Parliament and also the Shadow Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. We caught up with her on Wednesday morning, the morning after the Treasurer Josh Frydenberg delivered his federal budget, to get her reactions for regional Australians. Catherine King, member for Ballarat and Shadow Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. I hope I've got that all right. Welcome to Flow.
Good to be with you this morning.
Now, Catherine, the federal budget was delivered last night and we've got your portfolio interests, including infrastructure and our focus being regional infrastructure. What's your reaction on that front?
Well, I think when you look at the big announcements we saw on Monday, every front page was full of this, there's more money going into infrastructure. Of course, the devil's always in the detail. What the budget showed last night is, in fact, the government has baked in a $3.3 billion cut to infrastructure over the course of the next 4 years. Much of the announcements that they made on Monday, when you again look at the budget, well over 55% of all of the funding and projects is actually not in the budget. It's actually beyond the forward estimates. So somewhere down the track, we might see some of these projects. So many of them don't start until we think about 2027. So there was a lot of big announcements, a lot of puffery about those, but we're not going to see, workers on the ground and shovels in the ground for quite some time on many of those projects.
That's consistent with what your colleagues in South Australia in opposition have said. Shadow Treasurer Stephen Mulligan said this morning that a lot of those projects that have been promised in South Australia are in those out years, the forward estimate years or even beyond. So there won't be necessarily shovels and earth movers and graders going on around regional South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales in the immediate future.
No, certainly not from those big infrastructure announcements. And of course, there was the big re-announcement of the North-South corridor. They'd already announced that back 3 years ago. And some of the money for South Australia as well is where you've got budget overruns of some existing projects. So the overpass at Port Wakefield, for example, some of the money is to deal with the budget overrun of that actual project. So, we'll certainly see that. We've, of course, also seen the government, there'll be money that goes to each of the local councils, and I'm sure councils who've been absolutely strapped throughout the course of this pandemic and have really tried very hard to keep all of their staff employed and services continuing, will welcome that money. So each of the councils will get a little bit of that as an extension of that.
Is that about 20 million or something? It didn't look like a big amount for councils for those local roads.
When you look across the many councils that we have, it stretches pretty thin. So it ends up, for very little councils, it could be around 500,000. For some of the smaller councils, it's a sort of extra $1 billion that's going across to every council in the country. There's more money being put into the road safety bucket, and they're again, always welcome, but what you'd want to see, that money is really, leveraging good road safety projects, improving the star rating of our roads where those roads have got significant road safety problems, rather than just being thrown out to projects that are popular in electorates. I'd be very concerned about that. And of course, there's the Building Better Regions Fund, which has frankly been a fund that the National Party have absolutely pork-barreled into Liberal and National Party seats. So if you're fortunate enough to be in one of those regions, then that's terrific. Hopefully you'll see some money out of that fund. But if you live in seats like mine in Ballarat or in Bendigo, we've had very little money flowing through from that program for the last 8 years and have been pretty starved of that. So there's been some regions who've done well under the government, and lots of regions, unfortunately, held by Labor that have, and independents who have not done so well.
That's an important observation. We commented on that recently about the Building Better Regions when they said that sixth round was coming out, $250 million, I think it was, that they were going to spend. And we looked through some of the projects that received funding, even in our broadcast area. Some of them you scratched your head. They didn't really fit the bill of building. They were about staging rock concerts and things like that. But clearly for other reasons, we'll say, they must have seen fit that these projects were granted. And was that the project scheme as well that also saw some projects rejected for eligibility, but they still found their way to get funding?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. The round 4, which was announced, which was the drought round, they overturned the ministerial panel who makes these decisions. A very large proportion of the projects actually went to the seats that the ministers making the decisions held. A lot went to them. Their seats did very well. and there was, I think, about 49 projects that were recommended that for funding that were not recommended for funding that were funded. And you've got to wonder what sort of missed out in that process. So, frankly, this fund, the National Audit Office is looking at it very closely. It has been a fund that, frankly, has just absolutely been pork-barreled by the government, and it's not surprising that they've put an extra $250,000 into that as we lead into what inevitably is going to be an election year.
And we keep an eye out for, I think it'll be Thursday night, the Shadow Treasurer will provide a budget reply speech, is that right, on Thursday?
Well, actually, the Leader of the Opposition will provide that speech, and that's been put together with the Shadow Treasurer very closely and all the Shadow Ministers. I think that, again, one of the things that I think is really missing from this budget, whilst it's been a budget of let's patch up this problem we've got here. We've got a problem with aged care, as was highlighted by the Royal Commission, a problem of the government's making, having cut funding out of aged care. So let's try and fix some of that. But what it hasn't done is actually reform where the really big problems are in aged care. So the issue around the quality of aged care and the, not just throwing more money at providers and hoping that this is going to, somehow flow through into better care and more time with residents, actually making sure that happens and trying to build that into the system. And sometimes that's not about money, it's actually about enforcement and making sure that providers are actually directing the money where it should be. Hasn't done things whilst there's more money going into home care packages for older Australians. It hasn't done anything about the excessive fees that some providers are gouging out of these home care packages, where in some instances you see almost half of the funds in someone's weekly or monthly allocation actually directed towards administration and management fees rather than services to help keep them in their own home.
Yeah.
In the same with childcare, again, of course we'd welcome any more money into childcare, but the issue is we've got parents today who are saying, look, it is not worth our while taking extra hours at work or actually taking on an extra day at work or even any work at all, because all of it just goes in childcare. So, we're better off being, either not in the workforce or cobbling another arrangement together. They haven't done anything to actually address the structural problems that mean that childcare fees just keep going up and up and up, and it means it's just not affordable, not viable for people to take on or for both parents to be working in some instances. So that, I think, is really important. The big issue, I think, that's happening, certainly in my community and I'm sure across regions, is this issue around housing affordability.
Yes.
It's great that all these city people have discovered that you can live in the regions. It's really lovely. We welcome all newcomers in.
Yes.
But it's actually just driven prices up in regions through the roof. And it's meant for first home buyers and low income earners trying to get their first home, or let alone trying to find affordable rental accommodation. It's been a real problem, and it's also an economic problem. I'm hearing from many of our hospitality industries saying, look, we can't get workers who can actually afford to live in this community anymore, so we just can't open tonight for dinner. We can't open that extra day over the weekend because they just can't get the staff. So I think you'll see in Anthony's speech on Thursday a big focus on how we actually get more houses built for people in low and middle incomes across this country, and we make housing more affordable for everyone.
Yeah, we picked up on that with Jason Clare yesterday morning, the Shadow Minister for Housing and Homelessness. We have been picking that up across regional Victoria as well as other regional areas in the other states we broadcast into, is this serious housing shortage. The Coalition's budget seems to think will provide incentives for first home buyers and others, and somehow the market will sort out the needs of people in social housing and low incomes. But I imagine Labor would be taking a more direct approach along the lines of your community housing and national rent affordability approach to that problem.
I think that's the only way of doing it. I think much of what they've done in the budget, whether it's through home builder, whether it's through the superannuation changes for housing, really what it's done is just driving the price of houses up, is basically what it's doing. It's, again, keeping these very inflated prices up. It's great if you own your own home and you're wanting to sell it. It's absolutely fantastic. Or if you're an investor and you've got several properties, it's terrific. but it's not so great for people who can't get a deposit together. And even the small announcement they've made about single parents, it's a tiny fraction that'll benefit, and it's assuming that they're even able to get that 2% deposit. If you talk to a lot of single parents, they're living pretty much hand to mouth. They're earning really, really big dollars. So I think the government sort of missed the mark there as well.
Now, something else we will watch before we go, if I can ask you about Anthony Albanese's speech and two policy agendas that Labor has put forward is a manufacturing fund and also this Rewiring the Nation corporation and fund. They're big ticket items in rebuilding manufacturing and re-engineering our energy grid, which will create jobs in regional areas as well. Now, in your electorate, you've got, I think, a bit of rewiring going on, if you like. There's a project coming through the area from a wind farm or solar farm coming down the highway, something like that. That's the kind of thing we're going to need to see a lot of jobs delivered in regional areas and constructing that new energy infrastructure.
Well, I think there's two things here. One is Rewiring the Nation is really about, given that money is so cheap at the moment, we are in fact actually paying substantially for the rebuilding of the grid. There hasn't been substantial investment in the grid, really. We haven't seen that since the 1970s. And as we get more and more renewables that are coming from across the country, we're going to need to be able to feed that in to the electricity grid so that we can get that into households and get that really good, reliable, renewable energy in sustainably into households. So there's that, and really what Rewiring the Nation is about is in fact trying to get more, provide opportunities for better, cheaper capital to build state-of-the-art with, Australian procurement rules, with our commitment to all money going into employing more apprentices in these big projects. So really linking all of that up. What we've also got at the moment is the federal government, through the body Australian Energy Market Operator, has started a number of these projects. I think in my community it's actually having a pretty significant impact across some very viable farmland and certainly some really pristine areas that haven't had these sort of industrial scale large power lines through them at the moment. I'd like to see some better technology, some more thought given to how you actually put these in place, and we're going to see more of that, as I said, with renewables being across the country, but being how you use technology that maybe going underground a bit more, building more substations along the way, looking at how you sort of break some of these projects up a bit more so that you're having less impact, because they certainly have a big impact on communities. But of course, down Gippsland Way, they've been dealing with these issues for a very, very long time, and the move is as less power is being generated down from our coal-fire-powered electricity stations down there. We're all sort of sharing the burden of generating electricity in our own patches and then having to transmit that electricity. And there's some social issues that go alongside that as well.
I think I saw on social media someone might have sent you a message alongside a highway or spray painted their barn or something.
Yes, I've got a couple of spud farmers who I must admit have probably never voted for me in my life, have finally put a big sign up with my name on it. So I'm pretty happy about that, to be honest.
It's good to hear. It's good to hear from your constituents, I suppose.
It's good. And as I said, it's good to have the name up big and bold. People, anyone who's always good for name recognition when you're running into an election campaign. So I'm very happy about that.
If people were wondering who the local member is, they know now.
They do know.
And I think their agitation is to try and run some of this underground, and that's what you're talking about, substations or underground in some pipelines.
Look, a bit of that, and I think they want it moved as well. I think that the planning schemes for these, for anything really doesn't recognise the high productivity value of land such as those. And they're potato farmers. They're providing to McCain's. They've been doing that for a very long period of time. It's very productive farmland, and it does impact the productivity of the farm. There's certain things you can't do under these power lines, and I think that does need to be taken into consideration as these things are settled down as to where the siting is going to be. And I think the fact that you can't sort of protect or preserve this land, I think, is sort of one of their really big issues. And I've certainly taken that up and written to the various ministers about that for some consideration of that as well.
Well, Catherine King, thank you for speaking with us. We have to leave it there. A lot of great topics we've covered, but thanks for being available for us the morning after the budget.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Really good to talk to you.